Mary Richards.
Lizzie Lasater.
Welcome to another episode of today's anatomy question. Our topic today is Padmasana, lotus. But before we dive in, I wanted to invite you all to visit experientialanatomy.yoga. Give us your email address and you'll stay in the loop about the digital training that we're developing. We're filming it next month. I can already say next month. And we're so excited. It's launching in December 2017. So, Mary, Padmasana, lotus pose. What are your general thoughts about it? Who is this pose great for? Do you teach this pose? Do you practice this pose? Am I a terrible yogi if I don't enjoy this pose? And the one little vignette I wanted to share is that someone in my life who doesn't do any yoga very sadly said to me, oh, well, I could never do yoga because you have to do lotus, and I can't do lotus. So, this is like a 70-year-old guy. And he said, I've never tried yoga because I know I can't do lotus, so I'm not going to do it. And I felt really sad. But I think that's something maybe some people think that yoga is about sitting in lotus. So what do you think from an anatomical perspective about this pose?
First, I'd just like to say that we're all blessed children of God, whether or not we can sit in lotus or not. And there are some people that lotus, quite directly speaking, will never be an option because of their bony anatomy.
Okay,
and that could be related to the structure of their knee or their hip.
Okay. I didn't notice the hip. That's very interesting.
Well, yes. And honestly, yes. And so much of the difficulty with lotus pose for many practitioners is their seated position. They tend, we have an idea perhaps that in order to fully practice lotus posture, we need to be sitting flat on our mat.
Mm-hmm.
But really a lifted base, sitting on the corner of 2, maybe 3 blankets can make the pose exponentially more accessible for people.
Okay, that's really interesting because it rotates your pelvis forward, like putting it in your hip joint in a position of flexion, or what's happening?
It creates more harmony in the hip joints that will allow more mobility both at the hip and at the knee, because the hip and the knee, as well as the ankle, are in an intimate relationship with one another. And so what will happen, especially for individuals who have difficulty with seated posture, they'll try to stuff themselves into lotus pose, and usually it's the knee that pays the price for that.
So, yeah, the thing you said about anatomy is so interesting. One of my brothers, who doesn't practice much yoga, he's into CrossFit and this type of stuff, has always been able to do lotus, even without his hands.
So you're talking about shallow acetabular fossa, long necks of the femurs. So it takes him a long time to hit bone. But let's say someone has a deeper hip joint and a shorter neck of the femur. Their lotus is going to be much more difficult for them. And the reality is, we don't modify bone on the mat. And if we do, we're calling 911. Right. So, so much of that posture is related to anatomy. And the knee often pays the price because in lotus pose, we're asking a lot of flexion in the knee.
Yeah.
And
so you mean this is flex? So you're bending. Yeah, it's like extreme flexion, actually, right?
Yes, and there's also a passive joint movement in the knee. The relationship between the thigh bone, the femur, and the shin bone, the tibia, when we flex the knee, the tibia turns away from the midline of the body. It externally rotates. And one of the functions of the cruciate ligaments is to prevent too much of that rotation. So for students with really a normal ACL,
Right.
that relationship asked of the knee in lotus pose is very difficult to achieve without straining the cruciate ligaments.
So I have heard, I'm not sure who I heard say this, but that the Indians culturally, if you grow up sitting on the floor, of course, and also squatting so much, that you stretch out. So if I squat, then I'm stretching out the inside of my knee, and so that makes lotus a lot easier. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. So we tend to have less range of motion in the knee because we sit in chairs, on sofas, things like that. Our neighbors who tend to squat more, spend more time sitting on the floor, they have more laxity in the connective tissue of the knee. So what happens for many Westerners in lotus pose is their ACL in particular tends to be a little tighter, which is not a bad thing. Okay, it's not a bad thing. But we frequently have injuries in lotus to the meniscus.
Okay, pocket anatomy. Let me pull it up.
Keep the connective tissue. Oh, perfect. So let's have a more direct anterior view, please.
Like this?
Yes. Okay, so we can see on the right, you can see the joint capsule structures, the prepatellar bursa. That's that glossy white, those pads. So they reduce friction and cushion the joint, if you will. And if we look inside the left knee, do you see that little C-shaped disc within the knee joint between the thigh bone and the right in there? Yes. So, and you can see the ACL, Lizzie, right in there. So you've got the meniscus, and then coming right down in the middle of the knee joint, you see a ligament right there. That's the ACL.
Okay, because I'm so confused, because I always thought this was the ACL.
No, that's the medial collateral ligament.
Medial, okay, right, that makes sense.
Okay, and turn and show us the outside of that right knee.
Okay, it's gonna like this.
To other way. Sorry, that's the left, the one that you're showing us. Okay, I'm always thinking in anatomical position. So there you can see the lateral collateral ligament.
Okay, I'm gonna draw again. It's this guy.
Yes. See how much smaller that is than the medial collateral?
I'm gonna check.
Turn again. See, look how big the medial collateral is.
Yeah. Okay.
That's because the medial toward the midline aspect of the knee joint is typically the most vulnerable. And one of the functions of the menisci, if we show the other knee without all the joint capsule and ligamentous structures, you can see it looks like a C, the meniscus. It's almost inserted from the back of the knee, and it helps deepen the joint and pad it. So what happens in lotus pose when we're in that deep flexion, the tibia, the lower leg bone, it externally rotates, and that puts more pressure for most people on the medial meniscus within the knee joint itself, because the shin bone is jamming up into the thigh bone. And it's usually because the relationship between the hip and the knee is not optimal. for lotus pose.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps as well, your student has tight quads.
Uh-huh.
Because, could we pull up pocket body again?
Yeah. And then I want to ask, because is it, is there pain that I'm, like, if I don't feel pain when I'm doing lotus, could it be that I'm still doing damage somehow? Or is it the kind of, if there's no bad sensation in the knee, then you're safe and you can enjoy lotus?
I love this question. Thank you for asking it. Just because there's absence of pain does not necessarily mean there's absence of injury. Okay, so let's let that hang in the air for a moment like a Damoclean sword. And, okay, so do you see on the right knee with all the connective tissue, the joint capsule and the like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you see the patella, the kneecap?
Yeah.
Could we lay in a muscle layer, Lizzie? Yeah, there's the patella.
Okay, wait, no. Done. I have to turn off the drawing before it'll let me hear. Sure. Okay.
Muscle layer.
One more.
I want to see quads.
There.
Okay, stop right there. Okay, so do you see that white tissue, the quadriceps tendon coming down onto the kneecap and then onto the shin bone?
Yes, this, right?
Yes, that is the patellar tendon. And you can see it grows directly out of the rectum. It grows directly out of the quadricep.
Right.
So if the quadriceps...
So just slow down here. So you're saying that this tendon is actually coming, let me pick a better color, coming out of this, so it's growing, it's contiguous. Like there's no break here. Okay. Yes.
So if the quadricep muscles are tight,
mm-hmm.
Imagine the tension that creates within the knee joint, especially when the knee is bent.
Right, because the quadricep is then stretched because it's a two-joint muscle. It's stretched, especially if you're in flexion of the hip and flexion of the knee.
Yes. And so what happens then is we'll try to push through that muscle tension by relying on more hip, more ankle. You'll see people with the sole of their foot turned almost toward the ceiling. Mm-hmm. We'll try to get around that in an attempt to achieve the pose. Mm-hmm. And so in my opinion, we want to spend more time stretching quadriceps in asana versus hamstrings, because quadriceps are big, meaty muscles. Mm-hmm. And they have a profound effect on our hip and knee mobility.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. That's so interesting. Yeah, I've heard moms say, like, the poor hamstrings get all the attention in yoga, and they're so little. We're obsessed with doing uttanasana and dog pose. What is your favorite? I mean, basically the poses I do in my practice that I think of as stretching my quads are lunges, and then, like slowly bringing the knee to the ground. And then I like virasana. I know not everybody can do that pose, but is there something else I'm missing?
I like virasana as well, and that's the great thing about props, is we can support the posture in such a way to make it accessible for even the tightest quadriceps and even for knee situations. I have my own cloned cartilage and pins in my left knee, and I can do virasana with appropriate propping. Right. The other thing that I really love for quadriceps, especially for people like myself with a history of knee situations and hip situations, as you know, I have a 9-month-old right hip, so I'm kind of a mess, is I love dhanurasana, bow pose.
Really?
Yes, because there's no body weight pushing down on the knee, and you can use straps to make your arms longer, and I like that for the quads.
Okay, final question. Tell us a little bit about what you were saying before. if I'm not feeling pain, might I still be damaging my knee by doing lotus? Or you know what I do? I do a ton of half lotus.
Yeah. So we can overstretch our ligaments. We can overstretch our ligaments, and
Okay.
ligaments lack the quality of elasticity that muscles have. You know, muscles, they'll stretch and then they retract to their normal resting length. Ligaments aren't like that. Once a ligament's stretched out, it stays stretched out. And so we can overstretch those ligaments, and over time inherently create conditions of inherent instability in the joint, because ligaments are meant to hold bones together.
Right.
So just because there's an absence of pain or sensation does not mean that we're not creating conditions in which injury may arise at some point. Now, it also doesn't imply that we're destined to have knee injury, for instance.
Yeah.
It's just we want to be judicious in how we are mobilizing the joints so that we find the sweet spot between abhyasa and vairagya.
So can you define the fancy Sanskrit terms for us, Mary Richards?
I can. So abhyasa is discipline or consistency. And I love the way your mom defines discipline. Discipline is not force. Discipline is consistency. It's practice.
Yeah.
And vairagya is the letting go. So we want to find the sweet spot between tension and laxity.
Yeah. Which is what makes this infinitely fascinating to study and a little bit daunting, because I'm always looking for quick black and white rule. You know, everybody needs to rotate out their hands out in dog pose or hands in externally rotate. And the deeper I dig with you and Mom studying anatomy, I have to say I'm sometimes discovering a feeling of it's opening up and becoming more complicated.
Yeah. I've been practicing for 25 years, and as you know, I have a substantial education in movement therapeutics in particular. And the more I learn, Lizzie, the less I know. And that's what I love. No, that's what I love.
Can you say something positive?
Streets and out of trouble.
Say something positive so we can end, because I cannot end on that note.
It's just, that's the great, yoga is the gift that keeps on giving. Mm-hmm. Every day, the practice is new. Every warrior one is a new warrior one. How much of our life is like that?
Yeah, true.
What an opportunity to expand our perspective and explore our reality.
I love that. I was thinking that today at the farmer's market, that I love buying vegetables there because they always taste a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the really processed food is if you take it out, it's so consistent that it becomes, cornflakes are cornflakes are cornflakes.
Yeah.
So, Mary Richards, where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me at maryrichardsyoga.com and on Facebook at A Little Yoga Goes a Long Way.
Okay, and I'm Lizzie Lasater on Instagram, on Facebook.com. Please visit experientialanatomy.yoga and trade us your email for staying in the loop about our upcoming digital course. Namaste.
Yes. Namaste, Lizzie.
Bye, Mary.
Bye.